Good morning, everyone. So I'm Sad Dr. your moderator for this insightful session on why business models matter. So we will explain significance, current trends, and their essential role in organization success. And we are joined by experienced panelists, Steve, Diane, and Amalak is with us. And what I would like to remind all participants before we begin, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and we will address them during the Q&A in the last 10 minutes. Now let's hear from our panelists. Diane, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Diane Finkhausen here. I'm founder and CEO of HoshimWorks, and I'm a bit of an industry veteran. I spent about 24 years at GE, and most recently in the digital transformation effort at corporate, and built an ecosystem model, built and scaled an ecosystem model at GE, and really that inspired the playbook for HoshimWorks. So we'll be talking a little bit about business model innovation, I think, during the conversation today, so we can maybe dive into some of that journey. But thank you for having me, and I'm really excited about the conversation.
Thank you, Diane. And now, Steve, a quick intro from you.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for letting me be part of the panel. Steve Kiser, Air Force veteran. I did 21 years in uniform. After that, I got out and ran a P&L at one of the major defense contractors for about a decade. And part of the job of doing that was to be a technology scout for the U.S. government on how to bring technology out of the private sector and into the public sector. I've been an angel investor since 2012, and then in just 2 years ago became a general partner at Veteran Ventures Capital, where we do mostly early growth venture investments for national security focused companies. So,
thanks so much. And Amalak, over to you.
My name is Amalak. I'm a co-founder CEO at a startup called Orbital Composites. Prior to this, I spent about 18 years in the semiconductor industry, and I've worked in strategic marketing, sales, built R&D teams, strategy, M&A, and then took a complete U-turn and joined a startup, also part of the local angel group called Sandhill Angels. And at Orbital, we're looking at building robotic gigafactories both on Earth and in space. So we'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much. And now, Alan, could you please share a bit about yourself? You're muted. You're unmuted, Alan.
Thank you. I was talking away. So hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Ellen Chang. Like Steve, I'm a vet. I spent time in the Navy, though, not the Air Force. But I worked a lot on the Air Force problem set. So there you go. Spent 20 years with the Navy. I did, part of it was active duty. Part of it was actually as a reserves. My reserve work took me into a lot of technology innovation, bringing it into the special forces. So that kind of colors my work today with BMNT and H4XLabs. I did get into finance through the Wharton School and spent some time with on Wall Street. Over the last 10 years, though, have been really working with deep tech startups. Started an accelerator, later pivoted that to an investment syndicate, which I still have, and then work with BMNT to help companies understand markets. Part of this topic today was part of the labor of love that we have here at H4XLabs, where we're looking to help everyone understand what business models are. I feel that some people, even like large industries, sometimes don't really understand what their business model is. And I think we need to have this conversation. Diane, I see you nodding your head. In order to better understand, like, really, what are we trying to create here and how to stay a profitable company? So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Alan. Actually, I meant to kick off our discussion focusing on the importance of the business models. Could you please enlighten us what business models should inform and what defines a good one?
You're asking me?
Yep. Yeah, I would like to ask you first, and then I'm going to ask the same questions to Steve and Diane, and then maybe Alan can share his journey as a high-tech startup founder?
Sure. Yeah. So business models really should encompass your whole company. A lot of folks look at the business model and say it's the revenue model or the revenue and profit model. But the business model really should include your whole company, your revenues, your costs, the timing of it, talent, et cetera, in order to remain profitable and responsive to the market. Generally, what I've started to think about is business models that are already out there as I work with small startups and small businesses looking to innovate and take lessons learned around business models that already exist or innovate around them. I'll provide an example. If you're selling to the government, there's basically almost, like one business model. Maybe there's variations of one business model, but it's very much a cost-based business model. Whereas out in the commercial world, you actually can earn value. You can start to segment the timing of your revenues, and maybe you can manage and mitigate and segment the timing of your cost. You can then innovate around your expenses and actually become more profitable. And there's a lot more dynamism it's a much more dynamic environment on the commercial side. And I think we should have those conversations. How do we influence maybe the government side also to be a little bit more pliable? We're starting to see that. For example, there's Task Force 59 with the Navy started with government, well, actually COCO, contractor owned, contractor operated, which allowed a lot more. That's like a subscription-based type of almost a subscription-based type of a service model that allows them to move faster. And then I think out in the commercial world, when the SaaS companies started to come online, they started to play around with monthly subscriptions and trying to figure out how to make their revenues less chunky, maybe more consistent. And I think that's really important for businesses so they can be more predictable. I'll pause there and see if anybody else wants to jump in.
Actually, I'd like to ask the same question to Steve and Diane. Yeah.
I'll follow you, Steve, if you want to jump in.
Oh, sure. I was about to say the same thing to you, Diane, but so I would echo a lot of what Ellen just said, that, the private sector is obviously a lot more dynamic than the government sector. But let me answer this from two different perspectives. Let me answer it from somebody who used to run a P&L first. And so, the purpose of a for-profit company is to make profit, right? And so when you break that down, total profit is total revenue minus total costs, right? So a good business model is going to be able to maximize your total revenue while minimizing your total costs. And then when you work backwards from there, it unveils lots and lots of things that you can do. So technological business models might allow you to manufacture your product more quickly. It might reduce error rates or failure rates in your manufacturing process. Or it might reduce downtime in your system, or it might be squeezing costs out of your system on how it is you produce the thing that you produce. On the revenue side, Ellen, you must have read my notes that I put together because, being able to create high quality profit, which is typically high quality, predictable revenue that looks far forward into the future, is a way of doing that. One of my favorite stories about innovation, for example, was the solar industry. This very significant uptick that we've seen in solar adoption in the last decade was not because solar panels got 27% efficiency in their conversion of sunlight to electricity. It's because we changed the business model away from actually having to buy solar panels to put them on your house to now you can just enter into a power purchase agreement with somebody like Solar City or Sunrun or somebody like that. And you don't have to buy the power plant, you just buy the power from them. And now these companies get a steady, predictable stream of revenue. And then you can, lower your power bills and, contribute to a green economy. So it was that business model innovation. Now, if I can put my hat on as a venture capitalist just for a second, we're all about risk management and risk understanding. And so if you have a business model that allows you to do one of three things, better understand and characterize your risk, and do better risk assessment, do better risk mitigation, and consequence management for the risks that you do assume, and unfortunately they come true, those business models are extraordinary. The oldest of those is this thing called insurance, and that's been around for centuries, right? But that was something that collectively pulled risk across an entire vertical, and everybody paid a little, so everybody would be okay should catastrophe happen to the few. And so there's lots of other examples of that risk management framework that we look for in business models. And with that, over to you, Diane.
Thanks, Steve. And I'll double click on a lot of what you've both touched upon. Really, the business model. And back to your original question, the business model we believe informs, to Ellen's point, the commercial model, the operational model. And there are a lot of models that will be informed by a really good business model, and that will conversely inform a really good business model. So we view the business model in today's markets as being one that is learning and adaptive to ever-changing market conditions, but holds true to a vision statement and a positioning strategy. So the business model innovation that we've seen really shape markets and reshape markets in the past couple of decades is really the emergence of increased computing powers and connectivity that have emerged as a result of the platform economy. And so the platform economy that we've seen really show up strong in the digital era has allowed a lot of organizations to really atomize the way they design their operating models, and to extend the reach with which they understand the markets that they serve. So the platform economy just has established a level of digital infrastructure, if you will, across industry sectors and within operating firms that allows information and high-value information, high-value connections, and high-value transactions to flow with greater velocity and with greater precision than we really were able to achieve kind of pre-platform economy. And so we've seen this renaissance in business model design and operating model design on the heels of that platform economy. And so we have been working with a lot of organizations, public and private institutions, to step back and look at their business models and their operating models within that context. And to, if you think about what that opens up in the digital era, basically everything that sits between kind of your investor base and your customer base, now you can start to parse down and reconfigure with greater precision. You have the ability to, as an example, break down your resourcing model, your supply chain, and your employees and your contingent labor pool. The way you manage your production, the operating model can now leverage basically pipes and protocols that allow you to access capacity and innovation and expertise across operating silos and outside of the borders of your organization, so that your capacity base now has greater design freedom because of the connectivity that is enabled through the platform economy. And so this design freedom in the operating model that has been enabled by the platform economy now enables organizations to step back and reconsider their business model, right? So if I have greater adaptability in my operating model, and I bring down my costs by accessing resources on a more fractional basis, accessing more qualified resources on a fractional basis, that allows me to bring down my cost base so how does that affect my business model design? So all of these factors become more dynamic and give organizations, both public and private institutions, greater freedom to revisit their business model and refactor their business model. Back to Steve's point, to optimize the profit and the cost models that underpin their business model design. I hope that makes sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks so much. I do have like a couple follow-up questions, but I would like to ask Amlak the same question with a different perspective. I want you to share your own experience and the challenges that you faced as a startup founder while you're establishing creating your business model.
There's plenty of minefields you have to navigate as a startup, especially deep tech in aerospace and defense is also extremely conservative and you have to
Actually, I'm having a hard time to hearing you. Would you like to stop your video? It might be better just the audio.
How's that? Oh,
Yep, this is better.
is that better? Great.
Yep.
So just as a startup, understanding your constraints, I think, you know, what available at what point, what customers are willing to take on you. And the reference I was given for I was actually a really good article from HBR that's about there's two big types of business in a new company. Either you're entering an existing established market and you have to do a significant improvement from what's already there to gain a foothold. This is creating an entirely new market. And that we've realized that business from our side is always inevitable. But oftentimes which is entering an existing market and offering a product is a stepping stone to perhaps creating an entirely new market. Now, startups that are very well capitalized sometimes jump ahead and jump straight to creating a new market, but that's a very capital intensive effort. And people underestimate what it takes and long takes to accomplish that. And a very simple example, they're entering the market with reusable rockets. That's an existing market, but making it better. With the goal of launching Starlink, which is new service or a new market, create a new market, but using the.
I think he's dropped. So understanding the constraints is like one of the crucial things for the startups, and they do have like basically two major avenues, like getting into the existing market or creating the market for the product, which requires a lot of capital. And related to this, Alan, could you please share some of the business models that could pose challenges, especially concerning profitability or time of adoption for the emerging business models?
Yeah.
Assumptions.
Sure. Actually, I want to address a couple things that Amlak said. So what Diane said was very, it felt, Diane, like it was, you're a large enough organization and you're established enough of an organization that you actually can toggle and understand all of that, right? And here we are in startup land, which you may or may not have that. And
Right.
also in at least the fields I work in, deep tech, technology going into the marketplace, I find you're not only creating new technology, you're creating possibly new markets, and potentially, because it's a new market, no one is familiar with any business model. And so you have all this new stuff, and that's probably a large part of our audience here. I'm assuming that's a large part of our audience here. What I've learned, and actually have been talking to Mike Kubanski, he used to be at the Monitor Group. He's now over at eBay's family office, and he was doing climate tech. What I've started to learn is to think through new market creation in deep technologies. You know, a lot of climate tech is new technologies being applied to old problems, and how to actually inform and understand that there's going to take time to educate the market, because the market has a way of buying, and you start changing the way they buy, and maybe the CEO understands it, but that organization, you know, the guy executing the invoicing has no idea and will just stamp it out, right? And so you're like running up against these challenges of trying to say, hey, I'm actually providing you more value in a different way possibly even a more affordable way of buying, and you're running into these issues of selling, especially when you're a startup, where you even have to figure out what price you want to set. And so I just wanted to address those types of issues, is that especially within market creation areas. For example, we have some space companies online. They're going to go to space. They're trying to figure out, they're moving a satellite around and putting it in geo, or you know, maybe, you know, they're probably talking to insurers and probably deliberating around, you know, what is that price I can actually charge? I know what the cost might be. The cost actually might be higher than what you can charge. And so how do you actually reconcile the two and continue to go into that market creation? And I think that's really the struggle we're in sometimes, as we think about it. Like let's just say that's the struggle we're in, and let's not conflate the fact that maybe something's costly with not being a profitable business model. I think we're still trying to figure out and trying to get to that destination.
Yeah,
And I saw you nodding your head, so welcome to jump in there.
Yeah, I'd love to follow on that. And just to, I think what is super important is that, well, the business model, a good business model design really anchors, we believe, on asking the right questions first, and then making sure you have a really strong understanding of the, you have strong customer kind of intimacy. You know your target customer and their problem set really, really well within context. And the business model design today needs to be a dance between business model design and operating model design, right? There needs to be, as you mentioned, a nice synergy between business model design and operating model design, and probably iteration as the organization matures. And we think of business model design and operating model design as, Ellen, really to your point, the ultimate equalizer. So if you have really good business model design in synergy with your operating model design, back to your point, it can help large organizations that are complex and unwieldy operate more like startups. And conversely, it can also help startups act with the reach and the capabilities of a large organization. And I'll make that real. So in startup land, with the right design of business model and operating model, you're not over investing in your resources. You're understanding where the complementers and collaborators are, and where you can actually access fractional resources. So you're not over investing in full-time employees, as an example, right? You can bring on highly specialized resources and high precision innovation through this marketplace economy, and you're not having to over invest in long cycle experimentation, development, etc. You have this access to on-demand economy through innovation marketplaces, talent marketplaces, but that's requires a strong command of your business model and a synergistic operating model. You have to be able to marry those two and iterate those two as your startup matures. but to do that, you need to have a strong understanding of the market context and the customer problems that you choose to invest in. So that's our basically our worldview of marrying business model design with operating model design for startups, so that they can overcome some of those challenges that a lot of organizations face in maturing basically a new business concept.
Mm.
I'd love to throw it over to Steve too, or Ellen, feel free to react.
Steve, go ahead. I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Yeah, I was sharing some of my best material while I was on mute too.
That was brilliant. That was brilliant.
Pull the string a little bit on what I think Amalak was saying. It was actually very, very interesting when you start looking at a different business model. And let's just talk about space. And Marcus, I was reading your remarks in the chat there as I was also listening to Ellen and Diane. But if you look at Starlink, they completely upended the whole concept of how to bring services from space. So instead of having these very large geosynchronous, satellites that, were 6,000, 7,000 kilograms and cost an enormous amount of money to put out there, but had these massive throughputs, Starlink said, we're going to make a much more cheap satellite, and we're going to put them up in volume, and we're going to skimp on the design, and we're just going to build in about a 20% loss in these satellites. So a 20% loss in satellites for any other business model would have been catastrophic, as you can tell by like Viasat most recently. And so Starlink is going to put up 40,000 of them with the assumption that about 32,000 of them will stay up there and actually work. And because of that, the designs in the satellite that they were able to make were much cheaper, much quicker to manufacture, and you can put many more of those satellites on a single rocket that doesn't have to go nearly as far into space as the other business models. And so by relaxing some of those constraints of like zero fault, zero failure, or something like that, they unlock this whole new world of proliferated low Earth orbit for communication purposes, which of course Space Development Agency and everybody else is following and things like that. And so, that reduces risk, it reduces cost, and increases velocity to market. So it's just pretty spectacular. But going back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, one of the more important business model focuses that you can have is understanding how people can transact. And so I can't remember where I read this, and so please, I apologize, forgive me for not being able to quote the article in the exact numbers, but some extraordinarily large number of business deals don't go through, not because it's not a product market fit, it's because it's not a transaction fit, meaning that the way I sell and charge you revenue is not the way that you have the ability to pay me. And so at the granular level with individual people, we've solved that problem, right? We've got Apple Pay, we've got, fintech out the wazoo that is increasing the way that people can exchange values. It can be for cryptocurrencies, it can be for fiat currencies, it can be for barter, it can be for all sorts of things. At a company level, though, where you have many more regulations, we haven't figured that out yet. And so one of the biggest differences now is that we've gone from the buy and own to rent for services. Everybody's doing that. Even the DoD, we don't build our own houses on the bases anymore. We actually pay a private contractor to build those houses and maintain those houses. And then we simply rent that back from those entities. That allows us to shrink the boundary of the DoD firm or whatever, outsource something that's not our core competency to someone who it is their core competency, and everybody wins from that. And so when you're looking at what you're doing, that's one of the great things that you can do is this CapEx? And if so, how many transactions does that knock off versus if I can make this an OpEx, how many more transactions can I enable? So like one of the companies that we've invested in right now makes satellite propulsion systems, which makes up about 20 to 25% of the cost of a satellite. It's stunning. And so one of the things that we're working with is, instead of selling this to especially small startups that can't choke that down, to rent it to them back over 4 years. And so we've got to do the life expectancy of those propulsion systems, do the risk assessment of that, what's the odds that they're all going to live for 4 years or whatever. And if by doing that, we can switch that from a CapEx to an OpEx expense for the startup, we're going to be able to achieve much more revenue over those 4 years than we would right up front, even on a net present value comparison. And so when you look at your business model, look at how you can affect the transaction model the most. Now, I spent a lot of time in government, which makes me the government's biggest critic. This is one of the biggest problems that the government has, is because it cannot accept creative transaction things. Other transaction authority contracts, that's becoming a big thing. But as Ellen pointed out earlier, it's mostly a cost-based contract that has extraordinary compliance requirements for it. And that makes the government a very hard entity to sell to. So it's going to be very hard to innovate on that transaction side of things. But in the private sector, you can do that a lot. Now, take all that, and I'll release my death grip on the push-to-talk mic here in just a second. Going back to what you were saying, Marcus, of, we've got this amazing technology that we're bringing from the museum and art world, and we're bringing it to the satellite world. So what are the ways that I can innovate? Well, you've already innovated your business model on the way that you do technology. There's a lot of additive manufacturing, a lot of 3D model, manufacturing companies out there. But if you've got a unique way to do that, decreases timelines, increases survivability of manufacturing, and provides a more precise, product, then you need to be able to tell that story of differentiation. But then when you're talking about how can you commercialize that, I would like to go back to something that Diane was saying earlier on about the platform economy. Startups typically need hand-ups. And a hand-up can come in the form of venture capital or venture debt or whatever. Everybody knows about that. Or they need to be on a platform that gives them expanded access to their customers at low cost. Or they need a large prime that believes in their technology and will sponsor those primes. And so you're not going to like what I'm about to tell you, but like Raytheon Technologies, Northrop Grumman, L3Harris, York, all these entities, they all have venture capital arms that are specifically designed not to make a lot of money for that entity, but to secure their supply chain. They invest in the supply chain that they've developed in order to make that supply chain less risky. And so for you, I would find the major OEMs that would be consumers of that, approach their venture capital arms and get those VC arms to understand that you are a critical component of that entity's supply chain, and that's your sell point. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks so much.
I actually have a comment, Steve. I really am happy that you brought up the concept of how you're monetizing, the propulsion. I remember, I don't know if it's phase 4. We have a common friend in phase 4. But I remember, we were looking at models from GE, Diane, because the aerospace industry with these engines coming out, they became so expensive, no one could afford them, right? So they came up with the leasing model, which actually, in my mind, is better. Yes, they make money. The company makes money more over time, but I think they also take more ownership over the product. They're more incented to understand it because they then own the cost, right? And all of a sudden, there's a lot more goodness around it, and I feel like that's what started to happen also when the drone industry started to arise in 2016. And I was basically working with a couple companies. I'm like, how do we get to drones as a service? Because I really think companies owning that, owning the cost, really helps them bring the cost down and not just shove it to the customer. And that creates a better business overall. So that's my comment, and kudos for you, Steve, for bringing that up.
Yeah,
I could add
go ahead.
And I was just going to add this is a very relevant question because Orbital is gone through this journey. What Marcus is asking, and particularly, we are very interested in the service model, but it has plenty of challenges. When the capital cost is low, it can work really well. As the capital cost starts to go up, it starts to again bring back some additional challenges. But I can walk through how we are navigating through this because number one, so in additive manufacturing, there's all kinds of new machines coming on the market, but they're very capex intensive. So when a new customer, if you put yourself in customer shoes, they're evaluating the technology and they're flooded by, again, there's a machine being announced every other week. So how do you know what's going to work? So it's a pretty significant upfront cost. So anything as a company you can do to reduce that is a big deal. It may lead to a machine sale down the road, or if you are completely focused on manufacturing as a service, that's a. So I personally believe manufacturing as a service, unless your machine model is very clear cut, the manufacturing as a service is a better model because you can you can sell products, you can sell services, but you're also selling knowledge. And a lot of these companies out there, especially the big primes and others, they're just trying to learn. And by being able to sell even your knowledge as a service, you're creating that deeper relationship that will open the doors to the actual, recurring revenue manufacturing as a service, and potentially even machine sales. But, kind of, and also creating cash flow as you go, which is really, really important. I think I cannot emphasize that enough, that staying close to the customer all the time is really important, and keep tweaking and lowering that barrier to entry for the customer, and being a bit flexible in that initial model. And as the business model stabilizes, you can drop the other things that may be less attractive, but sometimes they can open the doors. The other comment I would like to make is because especially again in the space industry, this has been very prevalent, is what I call a house of cards model, which Orbital as a company has avoided. And what I mean by that is your success of your company depends on 5-10 other companies' success, which are all very speculative. And it gets even worse if everybody is counting on everybody else and nothing. All it takes is 1 or 2 of them to fall off and the whole house of cards falls down, right? And again, I think in the world of lot of easy capital, there were a lot of these models on paper looked really attractive, and there were just over enthusiasm, money being thrown everywhere, but the world has changed now. Right now you're back to the basics of if you have value, and again, it's you have products or you have services, or I call the third category, you have knowledge, or research, right? There's plenty of research dollars available, so you want to be able to capture those. So, but I personally would say if you're a startup, avoid house of cards business models. The actual things that bring money is hard, but the more you focus on that and start collecting revenue and making progress, I think the better off you are in the long run.
Yeah, thanks so much.
If
So
I
being
could-
flexible is important depending on the market conditions. Yeah, Diane, please go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick just to touch upon that, and then I'll defer back. But I think that's a really important point, right? Particularly for startups, and particularly in the context of these crazy dynamic markets in which we all live. We spend a lot of time on design within ecosystems and ecosystemic design, which is kind of the next layer out beyond business model design. We look at business model design and operating model design within the context of ecosystems. And we're seeing ecosystems really kind of redefine industry sectors and organizational definitions. So to Amalak's point, in order to de-risk kind of what you're building within the context of an ecosystem, you need to understand very, very carefully not only the customer problem set that you are choosing to solve for, but also the network within which you're serving those problems, or the ecosystem within which you're operating. We encourage, especially startups, but really any organization, to, as you're designing within your ecosystem design, this concept of OPM, the finance wonks in the call will appreciate this, other people's money. So historically, there's there has been a very intentional kind of set of decisions to determine where you deploy your capital and where you leverage other people's money. Within ecosystem design, you now, within the context of sharing, kind of the consumption economy and the sharing economy, we can be more granular about where we leverage other people's resources, other people's assets, which challenges us to be very thoughtful and intentional collaborators within networked systems. And so we can move some of what we used to have to bear in our business model design. We can now leverage collaborations and more granular access to resources and innovations. So we can be more precise in the way we design business models and operating models, because we can leverage OPM, OPR, other people's resources, other people's assets, other people's innovations, right? There's a much more dynamic interdependency across networked sectors and collaborative organizations that allows us to carry less of the fixed cost, and therefore we don't have to incur as much strategic capital allocation on our own book if we have very thoughtful and intentional and adaptive collaborations and access to a broader set of resources and innovations. Hope that helps.
So my follow-up question to Steve, from an investor's perspective, like, what do you value in business models specifically?
We like to go back to first principles again, and that is risk and quality of revenue, quality of earnings, and things like that. And then also, how well does that innovative business model actually translate into real traction on the other side of things? Sometimes you can get too clever by half, and your innovation outstrips your customer base. And as a result of that, this happens a lot with the government. It's like you're too clever by half for the government or whatnot. But we like things that really reduce risk, to be very honest with you, because you may not increase on the upside, but if you decrease your downside by a lot, then obviously everything gets better at that point. And so insight and control of risk is something that we like a whole lot more. The other thing is the expanding that transaction pool, something where transactions would be taking place, but for whatever problem it is that you're solving. So you don't necessarily have to have a better mousetrap, You just have, to be in a situation where there's more mice out there, for, lack of a silly term. And so those are the two things that we like a whole lot. I would like to get back to Bill's question that he put there in the chat thing. And Bill, that's actually not been my experience that once primes invest, traditional VCs avoid you. I'd love to take this, conversation offline, but if I'm looking at a company and we're early growth, so I mean, this would be within our wheelhouse, and we saw one of the big primes investing, we would jump on that in a heartbeat for two reasons. One, that prime is investing in them because they have an intent to use them at some point. Again, the venture capital arms of the OEMs invest in smaller companies not to make money, but to secure supply chain. And so, if they're worried about, this one company has this one part, and if that company goes out of business, their big product goes out of, that's the whole point of those VCs. And so if I see that, that's a vote of confidence in that OEM that they're going to be a customer of that startup for a very long time. So I'm going to jump on that with both feet. The second thing that tells me is those big OEMs typically have a whole lot better technical depth than I do. And that means that they've done their technical due diligence on this product and it's a product market fit. So that, again, that's more of a validation. And so those are the two signals that for me, I would see that. So anyway, so Goodman Technologies. Okay, Goodman Technologies, you gotcha. I got confused there. I thought it was Mantech, and I'm like, you're not a startup, Bill. Mantech's huge. And so anyway, getting back to the original question that Serdar asked, any business models that help us reduce risk, assess risk, or understand risk, we like, in any business model that allows us to achieve more transactions than otherwise would have been achievable. Those are the things. And then, of course, all the other things that we've talked about, better manufacturing, better revenue recognition, more predictable revenue, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Steve. And as our session near its end, I invite all participants to share any final questions. But before ending our conversation, I'd like to ask one final question to Ellen. What challenges and opportunities do you observe in government business models?
Hopefully it's not just me. I think Steve probably can, and also Diane can probably talk to this. I think Steve alluded to this. The government has a specific way of buying, and so when you come up with a new way of buying, it can't react. That's actually part of my business, actually, and working with a few unique organizations within the DoD in order to help them think through how to change. So for example, I work with the Disruptive Capabilities Office, and they're generally looking at new types of companies, unmanned systems, autonomous systems, which probably could be sold differently. They can access that technology differently. They don't necessarily have to go invent the technology, it's there. And so often think through how to help them think through how they can access that. Usually I run up in conversations around legal. Are we legally allowed to do this? Yes, you are. The contracting officer may or may not understand how to do a contract that way. And so those are the typical challenges that we run up against. Those are otherwise we do run you do have to consider from a government perspective the risk that they look at. They want capabilities to last at least a few years, and sometimes some of these newer technologies / companies may or may not last more than a few years. The government does have experience seeing their suppliers go out of business, not just within our supply chain, which Steve alludes to, but also in some of the newer startups that they've been working with, and so it kind of informs their behavior. Steve, do you have any other experiences?
No, that pretty much sums it up, Ellen. My experience both working as a contractor for the government and then investing in startups that work with the government. The government is not suffering for a lack of good ideas. The government is suffering from their inability to uptake good ideas because of their purchasing practices that were developed 30 years ago. The other thing I'll say, and I got to be careful because I can get pretty preachy about this, is that typically the product of a government buyer that they're focusing on is not necessarily the product that you would think, that we would think of. They are looking at quality of compliance and of the ability to comply because these cost type contracts are so onerous, and the contracting office's job is so challenging because of that. The contracting offices are typically selling to those companies that have shown an ability to comply with the terms and conditions of the cost type contract and deliver a mediocre product over a company that can provide a superior contract but may not be able to comply with all the T's and C's. And that's why you have certain companies that are making lots of money but would never make it in the private sector exclusively because they've invested in their ability, to deliver compliance. And so, if you are going to sell to the government, get a really good prime that's got a really good contract that shows that they can comply. Get on another transaction authority, or see if you qualify for one of the federal set-asides. And those are the three sort of innovative business models to sell to the government. And so, yeah, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, full stop. I would agree. That translation layer that Steve just described is really key, right? If you're a startup and with, great capabilities that would be beneficial, that's the translation layer that allows you, I think, the greatest freedom and access to that customer base. But the business model and operating model design, to Steve's point, and to Ellen's point, that is kind of reflected across the government space, it just reflects a lot of outdated assumptions and constraints that if kind of reimagined, could offer more flexibility. They're just the systems of incentives and procurement and funding, the decisioning structure, the authorities, very stovepiped. The incentive structures create a kind of a culture of risk aversion and a focus on compliance. So if you can find that translation layer that Steve just described, that allows you to, I think, drive the value into that system in a way that adapts to kind of the culture and the operations of that customer base.
Now, if I could take back 1 minute real quick and actually answer the question that Ellen asked instead of the question I had on my mind. How do you convince customers to accept your new business model? There's one business model that never goes out of style, and that's developing a relationship with your customer. And it's got to be personal, it's got to be deep, it's got to be continuous, and it cannot be transactional. And so sit down and have a conversation with them. What are your greatest pain points? What are your fears? What are your concerns? How does it work for you now? How does it not work for you now? And, in Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the one that I found to be extraordinarily useful is, I think it's habit number 6, which is seek first to understand and then seek to be understood. And so by sitting down with your customer to try and understand how they buy, what their risk management is, what their biggest concerns are, that kind of stuff. And then after you understand that, present your new business model in a way that addresses all that you've learned about them. That's the way to do it. And that conversation might take a week, it might take a day, it might take 2 or 3 years before you win that customer, or you might learn this customer is just not going to work for me. But always sit down and have those deep, meaningful conversations that seek to understand your customer, and that's the way you do it.
Thank you so much. Actually, our time is almost up. I'd like to thank you again for this insightful session. And thank you for the participants for joining us. And I look forward to our next event.
So before we all go, if any of you are willing to be connected with folks online, just put your contact information in the chat and folks can have it. I think, for the audience here, we'll be posting this video so you can listen to it, but you're welcome to contact all of us. I think, we're not gonna, I think this is a very important conversation to continue. And so we want to be able to help everybody out there. So, stay in touch.